Hello, everyone. I'm joined in this interview by Professor Frank Broekmans, Professor of Reproductive Endocrinology at the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands. And of course, he'll be known to many of you as an author, co-author of many studies, notably, of course, on AMH. And he's a member of many guideline development groups for important, especially European guidelines. I want to talk today about a paper that he and a number of international colleagues have just published with RBM Online, and it's on endometrial scratch, endometrial injury through biopsy, and its association with an improvement, possible improvement in IVF. And the study itself is what the authors call a reevaluation of the evidence. And that evidence roughly spans more than 20 years, begins with a simple observational study of the effect of routine endometrial biopsy in IVF patients. And it's ended a year or two ago with, well, I won't say it's ended, but our last strong evidence is a year or two ago, a meta-analysis of individual patient data. But first of all, I'd like to begin the interview by asking Professor Broekmans if he could just summarize the evidence, the landmark studies within that 20-year evolution of evidence, where it begins and roughly where we are now.
Good morning, Simon. Thank you for the introduction. And this is quite a question, because if you think of these studies that have kept us busy over the years, then I think from our perspective in the Netherlands, we were very keen on showing whether there was or not will be evidence for scratching as an effective tool in IVF. So together with the Australian groups, we started our study in the Netherlands, and we then were surprised to find out that the Lensen trial didn't produce any difference, while in our trial in the Netherlands, there was a difference in the terminal rates of pregnancy. And I think these two studies together brought us into this difficult area where we had high hopes, and then we started doubting, and then we are still more or less in the middle of this doubt, even though historically, after these two large trials were carried out, there was a very, very thorough individual patient data meta-analysis producing the overall finding that there was and is a difference to the benefit of scratching, mostly in the patient groups with recurrent implantation failure. And of course, if you look at this work, there are many aspects that you could discuss. Will it help in older patients? Should we scratch in the follicular phase, or should we scratch in the mid-luteal phase? Is there any reason to prefer the one over the other from a biological point of view? Should we scratch possibly repeatedly? And all these questions are still left open, but have certainly entered a near-death state because of the Lensen paper
Yes.
in the Lancet. Yeah, would that be an answer?
In the New England Journal of Medicine.
Yeah.
It's fair to say, of course, isn't it, that randomized trial was perceived, I think, as the final word on endometrial scratch preceding IVF. It's held up, of course, as an example of many IVF add-ons that, you need strong evidence, you need RCT evidence. But of course, now the study that you've were involved with, the meta-analysis of individual patient data, that suggests that the results of that Lensen trial were not absolutely watertight. I mean, I think, could perhaps you say a word, you mentioned it already, on the variables. I mean, how many biopsies, how many scratches, how many injuries, and when, which phase of the cycle. Could you say a word about that?
Yes, that's, I think, a few very important things, because if you look at the Lancet trial, which was a self-announced pragmatic trial, they allowed scratching at any stage of the cycle. And from a point of view of biology, you would say, okay, if you scratch on day 4 of the cycle, where there is a menstrual bleed going on, will it have the same effects on the implantation potential as scratching in the mid-luteal phase preceding a IVF cycle? I would wonder whether we have really sorted that out sufficiently. And our experience in the most recent trial, which hopefully is soon to be submitted for review, shows that indeed, if you scratch both early follicular or follicular and mid-luteal, the mid-luteal scratching is far better than scratching in the follicular phase. So there is a room to rethink. And then in the IPD, in fact, we brought together all the evidence available and found, in the end of the day, a difference of, roughly spoken, 4 or 5% in the chance of a pregnancy, which was significant. And you could, of course, discuss, is it sufficient gain to embrace? And then your question about repeated scratching, we never have seen convincing studies to show whether this is a way forward or not. This is, I think, a difficult part of the discussion. And then finally, will it help in all our patients? Do young patients benefit more than older patients? This is also a question that could be further studied because at the moment we don't have sufficient data to come to a conclusion.
Yeah, but indications, obviously, I think going to be important. I mean, can we fairly say right now that there's not going to be an overall benefit in a wide general population? Do you think that's, I mean, that would be the result of the main randomized trials? And do you think that's a fair conclusion to make now, and that we have to look at more specific indications to find a benefit?
Well, I think it's, to my humble opinion, there are now, for instance, in the guideline on recurrent implantation failure, there is a ban on scratching. And
Yeah.
based on the IPD by Van Hogenhuizen, this may not be justified. And because there has been so much discussion about this IPD, this is also part of history, there is, I think, a tendency not to embrace scratching in a very enthusiastic way because there are so many points of doubt. But the data are the data, and if you look at the data and you find a 5% difference important, then it's still a tool that you can, with justification, offer to your patients. And patients do still ask for this procedure once they get into a condition where things have failed. And in my clinic, where I'm still involved in, we will allow this request to be fulfilled.
But within a specific indication, previous implantation
Previous failure.
failure, for example.
So one cycle fully failed, fresh plus frozen embryos. That is a condition in which questions are asked about the stimulation, about the transfer, about what can we do, what add-ons are there. And mostly we say there are not many add-ons that you can rely on.
Yeah.
Scratching, according to the guidelines, is not propagated, but according to the data from the Human Reproductive Update study, we could decide to do that. And that's a shared decision making with the patient.
Yeah. And I guess that if we think of the RBMO paper that's just come out, this reevaluation of the evidence, I guess this patient data study would suggest at least the opportunity that's been abandoned. That's what you put in the title of the paper. that it's not a complete write-off, as it were, as the RCTs and the guidelines would suggest. But there are, in certain cases, certain indications, certain protocols, there are opportunities which may well generate benefit. I mean, would that be a fair conclusion to draw?
Yes, I think that's the conclusion to draw because the review that we are close to publishing will not give a answer. This is okay. This is not okay. It opens a discussion on the question: have we really looked at scratching in the proper way? Um, and this means that um, we are in a dilemma situation because if we feel that we as authors of this paper are right, then we should reopen our opportunities to do studies,
Yeah,
specifically focusing
yeah,
on the question of repeating which specific groups, so to stratify follicular scratching versus luteal scratching, etc. And apart from that, there is a big need to understand the biology of the effects of scratching. So that is another part of the things that you could investigate. And then, of course, modern technologies in terms of endometrium organoids are a big chance to try to sort that out. What is the biological mechanism which makes scratching
yeah, sure.
a ideal tool? Yeah.
Sure, sure, sure. Well, I think what we can say is that the paper, the RBMO paper that you've just co-authored, um, it does indicate that this story is not over yet, is it? That it's an ongoing story, that you've talked about an evolution of evidence, and of course that evolution is still going on. And I don't think, from at least what from you're saying, is that there are no categorical answers right now in wide overall general populations. And it is an ongoing story. And of course, it's been controversial for 20 years. And I guess the controversy will continue as the evidence continues to assemble.
Yeah. Well, from a historical point of view, of course, it's interesting because this paper offers a very loud wake-up call, and what will
Yeah,
come from there, we don't know. But today, science is more and more woken up by things that say we really had the wrong view 20 years ago. Look at the 1 million women study. Look at recently the story about the biological beneficial effects of lipiodol used with the hysterosalpingography. We believed in it, and now we have a study showing that there is no difference.
yeah.
So we
You
need to
see the
be
same thing
really sorry.
in HRT, don't you, with the Women's Health Initiative,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
where where you have an observation where it's greatly beneficial in many cardiovascular bone, and
yeah.
then the RCT comes along and says, sorry, there's no benefit. There might even be harm, and then 20 years later, slowly, the evidence is reevaluated, and the
That's what I
guidelines
mean.
can now.
Yeah. Don't rule out a revival of scratching because we have learned so much more in the meantime. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Good. Well, I want to end just one last question about this study that uses individual patient data.
Yeah.
Now, where are the benefits of that over a randomized trial? Because the Lenson trial, for example, was applauded as being methodologically perfect. So how can we question the results? But here you come with an analysis based on patient data. Now, why should there be a difference in terms of value?
Well, 2 points to make. I think the Lenson trial could be commented quite broadly because of the fact that they chosen for a pragmatic trial with potential consequences that you have missed the point. And second, the IPD that we produce is on only randomized trials, all the trials carried out over the past 20 years from authors who were willing to share their data on the individual level, and also being able to have a rigorous assessment of the quality of these trials, then put them together, and thereby making the best review with meta-analysis that we today can think of. So I think the value and the weight of the Van Hogenhuizen review cannot be underestimated.
Good. Well, Frank, thank you very much. It's clearly what you call the evolution of evidence. The evolution is still going on. It continues, and but I'm sure this paper of yours will raise a lot of questions and certainly a lot of interest. And I thank you very much for joining
Yeah,
us.
and this is what it is as meant, huh? That is important to say, to
Yeah.
steer up the public and the thinking. Okay,
Good. Thanks very much, Frank.
bye bye. Thank you, Simon.